Evening. I'm Melissa Davis, Senior Marketing Officer for Alcohol Beverage Services, and I want to thank you for joining us for the last virtual seminar in our series celebrating Bourbon Heritage Month. So let's see, we still have some people joining, getting settled, pouring themselves a little Jefferson's, but just in the interim, a couple quick things. We're going to have a pretty sizable group tonight. So we're going to use the chat box for questions. Everyone's line is going to be muted. And let's see, we also recording of the session has begun, and I'll be posting the video on our website for those that couldn't join us live tonight. And then last but not least, be sure to follow ABS on Facebook and Twitter. Our handle on Facebook is at ABS Montgomery County. On Twitter, it's at ABS MoCo. And or sign up for our weekly e-newsletter that I know a number of you are on for sales and specials, lottery details, product releases, community news. So let me just do a quick check and see. We've got some more people coming on here, but I think we've got a pretty good group. So let's go ahead and get started. So our seminar this evening is with Jefferson's Bourbon, and we have two great partners spending some time with us this evening. So Trey Zoeller, he is Jefferson's founder, and we are super lucky to have him with us tonight, and he's going to lead our seminar. So welcome, Trey.
Thank you, Melissa.
And we also have Chris Rafis. He's our market manager for Pernod Ricard, and Chris is going to help me moderate this evening's seminar. So he's going to help with some of those questions in the chat. So thank you guys, both of you, so much for your partnership. And without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Trey.
All right. I appreciate you all joining me. I hope things are well in Montgomery County. My sister lives in Bethesda, so I've spent a lot of times there, and I lived in DC many, many moons ago, right before I started this, which was in 1997. So I guess I moved from there in 1995. So a few years ago, back when I needed to have some gray hair in business to help with the authenticity and heritage that it was so entrenched at the time. But I'll tell you a little bit about how I got started and how we've kind of evolved over the years. And by the way, I haven't seen the numbers for Montgomery County specifically, although I did see the numbers for the state of Maryland just 2 days ago, which was up 146%. So I know that's different, but I know things are going very well in that neck of the woods for us. So I appreciate all your all's help and have had a lot of support from the county over the years. We've done lots of barrels with you guys and have lots of barrels teed up for you as well. I'm pretty excited. I'm actually, as soon as I'm done with this, I am heading out with our brand new chief barrel officer, a guy by the name of Dan Burke, who we just hired, to go out on our first client dinner since COVID hit. So I'm actually going to get out and about. So I'm pumped up about that. But in the meantime, let's see, as I stated, I started the business with my dad in 1997, and it was because I grew up in Kentucky, had relatives in the bourbon business, hadn't been for years, but I grew up drinking bourbon like most everybody else here in Kentucky did, and thought that that's what everybody drank. If you went to my grandmother's house, she didn't ask you what you wanted to drink. Rather, how do you take your bourbon? Everything that she cooked it with was smothered in bourbon. So it was just part of life. It wasn't until I moved away and I went to half dozen different places around the country that I realized that everybody didn't drink bourbon. And at the time, bourbon was in a 30-year decline. So there was very little choice, hard to find much diversity in what was available. You could always get Jim Beam, Wild Turkey, maybe Maker's Mark if you were lucky. And that was about it. At the same time, I would come home for Thanksgivings or Christmas, and I would go past these warehouses that I know were swollen with all this great old bourbon that hadn't been touched because it was, with that supply outstripping demand, it just kept building up and building up. So these old barrels either evaporated until there was nothing left, or it was being blended into a 4-year-old bourbon and wasn't being showcased. I even have heard stories about people selling off like 20-year-old barrels of bourbon just to write it off the books. So they'd sell it for the cost of the used wood. So really different time. As a matter of fact, somebody just posted, guy who started the Whiskey Fest in 1998, posted the first badge. Actually, Julian Van Winkle and myself had booths that were like way in the back corner, because this was in New York, and almost everybody in attendance at the Whiskey Fest was there for all the Scotch whiskey. So he and I were in the corner. We put together a deal. If you buy 10 cases of Pappy Van Winkle, you got a case of Jefferson's Reserve, no charge. Or buy 10 cases of Jefferson's Reserve and get a case of Pappy Van Winkle, no charge. And we didn't sell very many deals at all. Bourbon just wasn't that in vogue at the time. So at the same time, my dad had gone on a flight, a Delta flight, and seen an ad in the back of it that you could buy a barrel of Bushmills. This was in 1993. And they would age it for 7 years until the millennial, and it would become due as a 25-year-old Irish whiskey. So he bought it with 4 of his friends. They paid $5,000 amongst them all, so $1,000 each. They took a trip over to Ireland to see the barrel, and he paid the equivalent of $13.50 per bottle. And when they bottled it up, it was worth about $250 a bottle. So one, I thought, there's a good idea there. 2, I thought, why can't we buy barrels in Kentucky from people that we know that have all this excess supply? And my thoughts were bourbon was much better than Irish whiskey and Scotch whiskey, single malts that were so popular at the time. So I went around. There were 8 distilleries left. My dad's a bourbon historian. He identified over 2,500 distilleries in Kentucky prior to Prohibition, but that had whittled down either through consolidation or just people going out of business to 8 distilleries. I went to all of them. All of them at one were willing to sell to us, and they were more than willing. We were about the only fools that were dumb enough to buy this product that you couldn't give away. So I kind of started collecting small esoteric lots of bourbon. One of those, I bought the last 400 barrels, supposedly the last 400 barrels of Stitzel-Weller bourbon that would have become Pappy Van Winkle. It was a 17-year-old at the time. I paid less per barrel for that than what one of my sales reps did just prior to COVID for one pour. So I paid $1,200 for the barrel. He paid $1,350, or I should say I paid $1,350 for that pour. Wasn't very happy about that. Anyway, we bottled that up as a 17-year-old Jefferson's Presidential Select. And I was just told yesterday, as I did an interview with Fred Minnick, that he chose that to be the number 2 bourbon of the 21st century. So I started collecting these small esoteric lots of bourbon. And what I decided to do with these, first we came out with a Jefferson's Reserve, a 15-year-old 1 recipe bourbon. We came out with Sam Houston, a 10-year-old Old Iron Skillet. And then I started playing around with them, and I found that the whole was better than the parts. So I started blending these different barrels together. And I did that at a time when nobody talked about blending if they were doing it. As a matter of fact, blending was kind of a bad word in the whiskey business. And that was because most people thought of blended whiskeys as blended Scotch whiskeys, where they would put GNS or caramel coloring in there. These were all great old barrels of bourbon that I was putting together. And about the same time I was over in Scotland, I went to Macallan, which is a pretty heralded distillery. And I noticed that above the master distiller's door, it said production manager. And above the blender, it was whiskey maker. And so I've been kind of known as our whiskey maker since that time. Fast forward to today, we've got 19 different expressions of Jefferson's. And let me back up for a second before I go to that. All the distillers that I bought from would tell me the same thing. And my goal was to buy enough or sell enough that I could fund my own distillery to make my own juice and go on my way from there. But all the distillers told me the same thing. Between 65 and 80% of what bourbon is, or the heart and soul of bourbon, comes from the maturation process. And by looking at what everybody was doing, and again, leaning on my dad being a bourbon historian, I thought that the science of distillation had been perfected, but maturation was still an art, that you couldn't do X and expect to get Y. There were too many variables, and it just doesn't work like that. So, as I said, now today we've got 19 different expressions of Jefferson's. 17 of those 19, we do something different than what most distillers do, which is distill it, age it, cut it to proof, and bottle it. So with those other 17, and that would be the two other ones would be a 10-year-old rye whiskey that we just cut to proof and bottled, and some of our presidential selections that we've only cut to proof and bottled. The other ones, we put more time, money, and effort into it somewhere in the maturation process. With our Jefferson and Jefferson's Reserve, it's blending to really massage the juice one way or the other to get what we're trying, the flavor profile that we're trying to get out of it. And in most cases, we've done this, or I've done this collaborating with somebody that's an expert in another field, one of which is Chef Edward Lee, who I know has a couple restaurants in DC as well as Louisville. I talked to him this morning, actually. Or with our partners at OSearch for our Jefferson's Ocean, that I get expertise from these people that I collaborated with that help me see kind of the forest through the trees and have a different angle on looking at how to mature, manipulate bourbon. So to me, it's great working with these people. What we do to it really tells the story of why it tastes the way it does. And so most every one of our products has a great story that tells you what it's going to taste like and why it tastes that way. So I think that's pretty fun for our customers. Certainly, I just did a bourbon walk a couple of weeks ago in Montana at a ranch where we kind of went station to station or barrel to barrel and tasted all, actually not all, tasted 4 different expressions that we've done. And everybody said the same thing. These are so different. One of the things that I really kind of hit me on the head the other day, I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. One of my favorite bourbons that we have is our Jefferson's Reserve Pritchard Hill Cask Finish. It's a beautiful Cabernet out of Napa Valley. And we take 8-year-old bourbon, we put it in their freshly dumped Cabernet barrels, and we put it into hot boxes in Kentucky and finish it for 15 months. And it takes a ton of fruit out of there. It really gives a real big black currant or black cherry and chocolate flavor. And I was talking to kind of a real bourbon geek at a local bourbon society here in Kentucky the other day. He said, Trey, when I first tasted that product, I hated it. And now it's my favorite bourbon. And he said, I think the reason why is when I tasted it for the first time, it's like drinking a drink through a straw and you think you're going to have a Coke, but it turns out to be iced tea. And it's just flavors that you're not expecting. He said, but once I opened my mind to it and really started appreciating the flavors in it, it's blown me away. So I think that's kind of a really graphic, and it really tells you, hey, we're doing some really different stuff, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to push the boundaries of what bourbon can be without bastardizing it. So we're not trying to accelerate the process. That's why we always start with a minimum of 6-year-old bourbon and then try to manipulate it from there. So I did bring up Jefferson's Ocean. Someone asked me if I would speak specifically to that. And actually, before I do that, I'm going to talk about Jefferson and Jefferson's Reserve real quickly because I touched on that. Those are both kind of my favorite products to put together because once I get the other ones, it's almost following the same process over and over to give me that flavors. But these two, what I really need to do is taste this over and over because it's batchy and there's only one way to do it, and that's via tongue. So you look at that photograph right there, that's a batching Tuesday. And so it's all done by tongue. And what I do in both cases, and I'm trying to hit different flavor profiles with them, but I take up to 4 different bourbons of different ages and bring them together. And how I do is I take one, which I call my base bourbon, which comprises about 65% of the total. The other 3 change. And I've got a control that I'm tasting next to. So I'm always trying to hit as close to I can as that control. However, if I've got one that I like a little bit better than the one that's closest to it, I'll use that for that batch. However, the next batch, I'm always going back to that control and trying to get right next to it. So it's not something that evolves over time. It's in that general same category that I'm trying to get to. It's a flavor profile that I'm trying to get to. So the real difference between the very small batch is I'm trying to make that a very approachable, yet flavorful drink. My friends call it the dangerous bourbon because it goes down so easy. The Jefferson's Reserve is a lot more complex and sophisticated. It's a little bit older as well. It is, out of our 19 different expressions, our most quintessential bourbon. And I usually use that kind of in the control compared to our other ones. So I have that in the middle. And if you taste that next to the other products, you're really able to see how far we pushed it and in what direction they go. So I'll go ahead and jump onto our Jefferson's Jefferson's Ocean right now. People often ask me how I came up with this. I was on my friend's ship in Costa Rica. My friend's Chris Fisher. He is the expedition leader and great white shark expert. He catches, tags, and releases great white sharks. So when those tagged sharks surface out of the water, they ping up to satellites, and you're able to find out what their migration pattern is. And his whole point is to follow this. It would be kind of like following the apex predator in the Serengeti, the lion. So you're able to find out what's going on with the health of the ocean. And these great whites also certainly keep the oceans in balance. So his goal is all about sustainability and abundance, whereas he boils it down very easy, or basically to make sure our grandkids have fish sandwiches to eat. Nonetheless, we were on the bow of his ship. We were doing what Kentucky boys do on the bow of a ship. We were drinking bourbon. And as we did that, I watched the bourbon rock back and forth within the bottle. And I thought if this would happen in a bottle, it would certainly happen in a barrel. And if it would happen in a barrel, it's definitely going to change the maturation process. So I suggested to Chris, let's put some barrels on your ship. He suggested that's probably not a good idea, as his crew catches great white sharks. But the more bourbon he had, the more he came up with a great idea. Let's put some barrels on the ship. So we did. We put 5 new fill barrels on the ship. New fill is in, it was right off the still, so it was colorless like water. He went to an uninhabited island chain, unfortunately for me, because I couldn't visit the barrels, but he bounced around for 3.5 years, 1,200 nautical miles southwest of San Diego. I came back to Key West after 3.5 years. I brought some journalists down. We hadn't tasted it, but we tapped into those barrels, and what came out was phenomenal. It was black in color. You see that bottle in the middle is only 3.5-year-old. It was very thick, very viscous, and it was absolutely delicious. So we got into it, tasted it, loved it, sent one of the barrels back to Independent Stave Company, which was the cooper that made the barrel. They'd never seen caramelization like this. So really you had a number of things happen. One, you had the constant contact of the juice to the wood, which imparts color, imparts flavor, and just as importantly, that wood acts as a filter and strips the astringency from the alcohol. 2, and what we do today and how we commercialized it is we take 6 to 8-year-old bourbon, we put it on ship, we put it in cradles that go into containers that go onto the top of the bow of ships so it gets as much pitch as possible, cut big sunroofs in it so it's exposed to the elements, gets rained on, snowed on, the heat blasted, and ship it down to the port of Savannah, goes out down through the Caribbean, through the Panama Canal, over to New Zealand, down around Australia into the Tasmanian Sea, back up to Indonesia, China, Japan, back over to Tacoma, Washington, down the West Coast, down Mexico, back through the Panama Canal, up the East Coast, over to the North Sea, hits a couple ports in Europe before coming back to the U.S. and back to Kentucky. So during that time, it hits 30 different ports on 5 continents and crosses the equator 4 times. So again, it's got that jostling within the wood. As it crosses the equator, that extreme heat caramelizes the sugars in the wood. And then 3, and I think most important, that the sea air permeates those barrels in the open sea. So as the Charleston Brownwater Society dubbed it years ago, the salted caramel popcorn bourbon. And as you nose it, I think you get that salt right away. As you try it, you get that great brininess up front and on the sides of your tongue. Kind of really coats your tongue because of that caramelization, yet still goes down very easy because the wood takes that astringency out of the filter. So it makes for a really unique pour. We've done 22 voyages, and even though it goes on the same route, depending on what time of year or what it encounters, I think voyage 14 hit 3 hurricanes, which rocked the hell out of it, which made the juice evaporate out like crazy. We only harvested or had a yield of about 30% of the entire barrel, but that condensed it and made it very, very briny. So it was really unique. So people collect the different voyages and have nice little arguments on which one they like best. We now have 3 different expressions of Jefferson's Ocean. We've got our regular Ocean, which is a rye as a small grain. We've got the cast strength version that comes out once a year and is about half the yield of a typical voyage. And we have a wheated version, which again is about half the regular voyage. It comes out once a year. So it makes it pretty unique. So again, what we do, and we're really different. And one thing I do want to bring up is I started out sourcing older bourbon from different distilleries here in Kentucky. Then I started contracting with them to make our distillates specifically for us. And then I started distilling. Still today, we distill, we contract, and we source. For me, the main thing is what we do it with a maturation, or what we do with it after it's been distilled, and how we push it one way or the other from that point. So we were on the forefront of playing with maturations, as we've been doing it for 23 years. And now there is a customer and a clientele that loves to see what we're doing. A lot of what we put out, and a number of those expressions are allocated once a year. But we've had phenomenal growth, specifically over the last 6 years. And knock on wood, luckily for us, bad for a lot of our on-premise customers, but COVID's been very good to us, and we've really done well there. So much so that we pulled out of the international markets, and we're using all our juice for all the domestic markets. And as I said at the beginning, Montgomery County has been a great, great supporter of us for a long time, and we really appreciate that. So with that, does anybody have any questions?
Hey, Trey. Okay, so I'm going to read some of the questions asked in the chat. We have George, who asked, who says that the original Ocean barrels were all stored above board on the research boat. Are the newer expressions cached below decks?
Well, the original and the first voyage, they were on the bow of the ship. And that what we've done since then, we put them in cradles that go into containers that are contracted to be on the very top of the bow of the ship. Now, that being said, we have 4 barrels on the original O-Surge at all times. And those 4 barrels spend about a year on the O-Surge, and then we auction those off for charity. Those are down below.
All right, and next we have Mark asks, what kind of ships are these? They don't just carry your bourbon, do they?
No, unfortunately, I hope that we can get to a point where we have our own proprietary ships. They would be small freighters.
With one comment where someone said you should offer a cruise, which would be hilarious.
I agree.
Let's see here. Why the name Jefferson?
When I started, I was in my 20s, and everything about bourbon was heritage and tradition. And so I was looking for something that kind of had some heritage and tradition. And then what we were putting in the bottle, I thought was very complex and sophisticated. It turns out that Thomas Jefferson was known for his innovation. So that kind of has worked in spirit with us. But it was really, I thought the juice was very complex and sophisticated. And I thought he kind of embodied that.
Now this was a question for us. It says no ocean at ABS. Yes, there will be ocean. In the next week, you should have the ocean will be in stock. The ocean cast strength will be in stock. And the barrels should be finished within the next 2 weeks, I would say. I'm cautiously optimistic next week, and then they will be on their way up here. So there'll be 2 different barrel types coming up, a single barrel coming up in hopefully the next month.
So thank you, Chris. That's actually the biggest question I've been answering in the chat. So don't worry. We have 3 Jefferson's products right now. 2 more are on a truck, quite literally. And then Trey is going to talk about 2 special barrel picks in just a little bit that we did recently with their company. So hold tight, give us about between a week and a month, and you will have a lot more to shop for in our stores.
Next question. Are there any new expressions yet to be released that you're particularly excited about?
I am 2 that were coming out this year. One is we are doing a high proof, 100 proof Jefferson's Reserve single barrel release that we'll start doing in November, and which is the first time we played around with a proof like that. And we did that mainly because we've had such big requests for it. And then in January, we're coming out with the first rye that we've had in 5 or 6 years. It is a cognac finish rye that we finished the rye for 18 months in cognac barrels, and it is delicious. Very pumped about that.
I have been getting harassed about that. So thank you for letting me know January, because I can now tell people to leave me alone. Okay, next we have from Andy. Is there a difference in taste depending on where the barrel is on the ship?
Yes and no. Yes, all the barrels come off a little bit different, just because this is like magnifying or amplifying is a better word, excuse me, the maturation process. So like you have microclimates within a warehouse, you're going to have hotter areas within that container, certainly, or more importantly, those that are more exposed directly to the elements, like the sunlight. So I just came from Montana, where we have a barrel up kind of in a lifeguard stand up on a ridge. And believe it or not, that sun in Montana is so close to the sun at that elevation, it's just pounding on it. And it really affects the bourbon. So really, you get some really amplified flavors barrel to barrel on.
Okay, Mark asks, have you thought about rocking the barrels on land?
We have. However, that would only satisfy one of the 3 things that happen on the ocean voyage. Thought about like a cement mixer, taking those barrels around, or even a merry-go-round or Ferris wheel. But that wouldn't caramelize the sugars in the wood, and it wouldn't have that briny salt air that comes through.
Question, any new presidential series coming?
We're probably a year out.
Okay. Can you tell us about the Jefferson? This is from Robert. Can you tell us about the Jefferson's River expressions?
Yeah, those were great. Those were kind of, after I brought back the ocean and saw what great flavors came out of it, I kind of came up with a hypothesis of why did bourbon proliferate in Kentucky? You can make it anywhere in the country. Why is 98% of it from Kentucky? And my thoughts were it was the journey that it went on, where you put barrels and float it down the Ohio River to the Mississippi, put it on ships, sail it around the Straits of Florida and up to the East Coast, D.C., Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York, Boston, and that's where the populace of America was at the time. So we historically reenacted that and did it as close to we could as possible. It took us 4 boats. We destroyed one boat. Hurricane Matthew destroyed one boat. We had to actually siphon the juice out of the original barrel after 6 months, put it in new barrels when we were down in Key West because they were so beat up. But when it landed in New York, a year to the date that we took off, it was as dark as a 16-year-old bourbon that I was bottling up, and absolutely the smoothest bourbon I'd ever had. I think that was just that pounding against the wood for so long, just really beveled it out. I could still taste that it was young because it was grassy up front, but it was so much more developed than bourbon distilled on the same day and aged in Kentucky. And I think that's why people were willing to pay so much more for it on the East Coast, and that's why the demand proliferated and why bourbon became king from Kentucky. So it really changed from whiskey to bourbon as they put it in barrels for the first time and put it on that journey.
Question. It says, hey, from Bourbon Women, DC, and sorry we missed you in Kentucky this year, but what can you say about how the market for bourbon has evolved over the years as its appeal catches on with a wider demographic?
With the women demographic, is that what?
A wider demographic.
So, I think bourbon as a whole is caught on for a number of different reasons. I always say it's because of the smartphone, because you can get so much information, you can get the history, you can really geek out about it. I think our bourbon specifically have such a broad range, like our cask finish, not our cask finish, our rum finish. It brings that, it's like a dessert bourbon, it's got a lot of banana and coconut flavors. Our Cabernet flavors, if you like Cabernet, you're getting a lot of those flavors in there. My mom loves the Jefferson's Ocean. She calls it a dessert because of the salted caramel flavors that come out. My 8th generation grandmother, Marianne McLean, was arrested in 1799 for moonshining and bootlegging. So that made her the first documented woman in the American spirit business. And we're coming out, this is going to be in about a year, with a special series dedicated to her that I think will also appeal to that demographic.
Mikhail asks, to be clear, Ocean spends its time 1 year and at 30 ports?
No, 6 to 8 years in Kentucky, and then it hits 30 ports, 5 continents, crossing the equator 4 times, which takes about 8 months.
Okay. And I'll make sure I get Melissa. We have the Voyage 22. We have the whole map of everywhere it went and the whole write-up on it, and I'll make sure you get that you can get it out to everybody. Let's see here. Is there a non-ocean cask strength?
No, that 100 proof is going to be our first higher proof other than the cask strength ocean.
And then Mark asks, after you do a blend, do you ever go back the next day to see if it still tastes the same?
Yes, for sure. Your palate changes during the day and day to day, so yes.
Carol asks, can you still get the Pritchard Hill Cabernet cask finished?
You can, for sure.
And George
I don't drink it all this summer before it gets cool.
George asks, value compared to Scotch and Japanese whiskey.
How do we? I think bourbon's a lot more complex. I always say that bourbon's the most expensive spirit to put into a barrel. Into a bottle. 1, because we use new barrels. 2, because of the evaporation. 3, the time value of money. I think it's much more complex and has a lot of flavors.
And then we have, so that was the last question there. I want to talk about really quick. Let me just make sure I have this. We have, let's see if this is in my notes. Don't have it here. So can you just give a little, just talk about the current Voyage 22 and what they should expect when those get released into the Montgomery County?
Voyage 22?
Mm-hmm.
So really what that is really, oh my gosh. All right, hold on a second. I want to make sure. Is that, I don't think that's our regular, I'm getting 21 and 22 mixed up right now. 22 is the regular Voyage, not the cast strength, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. A lot of them going around in my mind right now. I believe 22 really got pummeled by some storms. Yeah, it was a pretty calm season until we got to New Zealand. Between New Zealand and Australia, it got battered pretty good there, all around Australia. And then it was relatively calm all the way up Indonesia, China, Japan. But from Japan to Washington, it got hit by a big storm there. And we're able to get daily sea conditions, whether it's calm, moderate, rough, or very rough, and the average air condition temperatures. So we get a good idea of what's going on. Because of those storms that really nailed it, there was a lot of jostling. So you're going to get a lot of the brininess that's going to show up. So that's going to be the predominant flavor that's going to come throughout the voyage.
Okay. Now, this next question is one I was actually thinking about earlier. This is from William, and I'm going to just ask his question and then kind of tack mine on there. What do you do with your used barrels? And my question was going to be, is there any talks about sending those over to our Irish whiskeys, and Pernod or Scotches or anything, or to Mexico, to our tequilas?
In the works.
Okay.
I can't divulge, but yes.
Great. Robert asks, what about a weeded expression?
The only weeded that we've ever done is our weeded ocean voyage.
Do you ever do any lab chemistry of your products, and what does it show?
Yeah, we do all the time. Certainly as we're distilling, we do that constantly. But yeah, we do. We take labs up. And more important than anything for me is taste. Once we're talking about mature whiskey, the labs, they can give you some different information, but at the end of the day, it's flavor, and it's bringing barrels together. They're going to work together. So balance.
Okay. So George says, so Jefferson's Oceans is climate change whiskey. And then William asks, ever think of leaving barrels out as a hurricane season expression?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, yes, we have. We are.
I don't know if you were seeing me right now, but I bought these at a liquor store a couple weeks ago, and I have no idea what they are. These little guys, they're the Jefferson's Wood Experiment. I have number 3 and number 4. And my question is, should I buy them all?
Absolutely. They're delicious and they're very different and very fun. Originally they came in packs of 5, so you would buy 5 200 milliliter. So you really had a bourbon tasting kit. Made great gifts. One of the big aha moments I had is I became a barrel chef for a weekend at Independent Stave Company's headquarters. I'd been to their cooperage in Kentucky countless times, but they've got 12 cooperages around the world, make wine and spirit barrels from around the world. And I worked on all these different barrels. And when I saw all the techniques that they put into them, I thought, why are we so rudimentary in bourbon that we only do 4 levels of char? So I started working with hundreds of different experiments. Actually, I started this in 2012, where I took 14 different barrels that we finished in and tasted the whiskey out of there every 30 days for 36 months and kind of charted them how they evolved. One of them, for instance, was a butterscotch bomb after 60 days. It was awesome. Like, this is good at 60 days. I can't wait to taste it at 90. At 90, it completely turned and tastes like green wood. So it kind of peaked, went down, kind of settled down, got a little bit better. Some of them, continued to get better. It was really cool to watch them evolve. So over the years, we've done hundreds of experiments like that. We've created our own proprietary barrel that we finish our Jefferson's Reserve Twin Oak in.
And then I have another question. It says, with a lot of states taking measures to support distilleries to withstand COVID shocks, do you see any lasting changes in the legal frameworks that might simplify distribution or lower other hurdles in the spirits industry?
Well, I think this is going to kind of really kind of put an exclamation point on this. About the same time in Kentucky, we passed direct-to-consumer shipping. It's just going into effect right now. It's only 14 states, but I think, and that's, for a lot of the craft distillers, and we're kind of like a mid-major, if you were talking like a college football. We're not nearly the size of the big guys, but we're a lot bigger than the craft guys. So I think craft, there's going to be some things that are put in place to really help the craft industry, or it's going to die on the vine.
Okay. Next, somebody says, Robert says, what's your preferred flavor profile? That's a loaded question.
Yeah, depends on the day. I do like big ryes. I'm not much of a wheated bourbon guy, and I don't like big proofs. That's why I'm not big on barrel proofs. I know that's very in vogue and people love them right now, but that burns your taste buds out so quickly.
Okay. I mean, if you ever...
I get shamed all the time because I drink my bourbon on the ice most of the time. And usually when I'm doing this and tasting, I do it neat, but when I'm having a glass of bourbon, it's a big cube of ice.
If you're ever just trying to make me happy, I love high proof rye, just saying. Okay, next we have, you seem open to trying about anything. What hasn't worked?
Finishing in Tabasco barrels. That was a bomb. Using tobacco staves or sticks where you hang tobacco, or you cure them, hang them to the barn. Been used over and over, and I did that with a pretty famous chef, and the flavors came out. There were some nice tobacco flavors that came out, but might have been carcinogenic too.
JR asks, what's the typical mash bill, and does it vary by product?
It does. It does. So it'd be considered a high rye. As I said, we've been contracting with distilleries in Kentucky to make our recipe for us for 20 years. And those would be considered a high rye. And that's, we have different ones for Jefferson and for Reserve, but what we're making mainly at our distillery is a 36% rye. And that's more of like a flavor agent. So a little of that goes a long way. For what I'm doing, we're not looking for that big of a rye punch into it.
And that seems to be about it for the questions. Melissa, do you want to wrap it up?
Well, I was going to ask really quickly, was there anything else we needed to talk about related to our 2 custom barrels? Did we cover those? Hint, hints.
I gotta see if you would actually have the notes on that. Hold on one second.
So just while I know Chris is bringing up some information, but like I mentioned, we ordered 2 custom barrels that are very different. They're Voyage 22. And COVID threw a little bit of a wrench in our plan because we were planning to actually have those in stock before we had the seminar. And there were some just, labor issues and all sorts of problems that I'm sure Trey can talk about. But we're getting there. And so that's what Chris was saying, probably in the next month or so. So Trey.
Yeah. And I apologize for that. We use a third party to decorate our private labels. And it's a company that employs special needs folks that were very limited in the availability. They had to come to work during COVID. So we got stacked up pretty badly on that. So I apologize.
Okay, so the barrels are in the next round to be released. I'm looking at that right now. So that's good. If they're not already finished, they will be released probably in the next, less than, just hypothetically, latest will be less than 7 days. So then, as soon as that happens, we can get them set up in the county. But the barrels they got, and I don't know if you can answer the question on this, but the barrels that the county got were barrels number 20 and 23. Not sure if you had any notes on that.
I wish I had them in front of me so I could taste them and give you all some flavor notes on it. What I will do is taste them and send you all some tasting notes on them.
Great. That would be excellent.
That's the best I can do since I don't have them in front of me right now.
That works.
That would be awesome. I mean, if you would do that, I'd be more than happy to pass them along to everyone that's in this on this virtual seminar. So that would be great.
Would love to.
Thank
love
you.
to.
So let's see, did we have any other questions, Chris, come in real quick?
Let me see here. Nashville, props for your t-shirt in case you didn't get them already. Do we get a discount coupon for attending this event?
I answered that one.
I see your answer. And then how long were the Ocean's Voyage 22 aged?
So it was, bourbon was 6 to 8 years old. That's what I think is a honey spot for us to use and get the most out of voyages and finishing. And then again, went to 30 ports, 5 continents, crossed the equator 4 times, and was on the water for about 8 months.
And let's see, let me get William's question real quick. Does ABS actually sell the barrels that the ordered bourbon comes into the public? So sometimes would be the honest answer to that. Sometimes we do actually sell the barrel itself. We've normally done that at special events like Whiskey Rocks. So most likely right now, those are going to stay in store for some sort of display purposes. But if and when we get back to some of those events, we'll definitely start selling the barrels themselves again.
The last question I got here is, how do we start our own distillery?
Well, from what I just said a few minutes ago, there might be some for sale quite here coming up pretty soon. For me, that wasn't an option. I was able to borrow some money and buy bourbon first and create a brand first. And I think that's the only way a business plan really works. You got to put so much bourbon down for years to come that it's really difficult unless you're selling a good amount. So, but that being said, I think they're, unfortunately, a lot of them were struggling prior to COVID. I'm talking about craft distilleries, and COVID's kind of really, unfortunately, put a left hook on them. So there might be some available, but I would say the most important thing, it's a big cost to build a distillery. It's a bigger cost to put down enough bourbon for long enough to make it really good and sellable. And then to get out there and market it properly when you've got the climate and competitiveness that it does now, that's the biggest cost. So for me, I was lucky. I did it at a time when nobody else was doing it. I always say I was too dumb to know better. And I didn't eat for the first 8 years. There was a lot of product that I couldn't give away. So a lot of people have said, "Oh my God, your timing was perfect." Like I said, it's been 23 years and I couldn't give it away for the first 8.
Carol asks, and this question is for you, Melissa, does the new store in Poolsville have more selection?
So say that for me one more time, Chris. Does it have what kind of selection?
Does it have more selection?
So our new store in Poolsville actually is a spirits only store. So it does not sell wine, it does not sell beer, only spirits. And I will say it's got a great selection of Maryland made products. It's got a great selection of bourbon products as well. So if anyone was hunting there when it first opened, the team sent a lot of allocated whiskeys their way. I won't say it's still that way, but definitely check our search portal. And then someone actually mentioned it, I don't know if it was Gina or Carol, but we do have a coupon running right now just for the Poolsville store that is 5 off $50. So just a quick heads up.
Have you ever thought of doing a partnership blending with another producer?
We've talked about doing some things together, but we haven't made it happen. Talked about with one of my good old friends in the industry that have been around for a long time. I'd love to see it happen.
Next question from Joan was Booker No was committed and known for small batch. How do you define your vision for Jefferson?
I would say that we want to do more than anything is push the boundaries and definitions of what protects bourbon without bastardizing it. So always staying within the legal limits, but again, not cheat the process, not accelerate it, but enhance it. So doing that by always tipping our hat to tradition, and that's why we use fully mature bourbon before we start manipulating.
William asks, so
I always say this to that point, I always say, what am I going to do? I can't out distill Booker or Jimmy Russell. So, I'm going to mess with maturation, which is something that it's the final frontier, but that's where there's lots of room.
William asks, so you have to build the brand with sourced before you can eventually age your own distillations?
That's the only way I can see to make a business plan make sense. And if you look at all the other guys, the Brown Foreman, Heaven Hill, Beam would be the exception. Makers would be the exception. Almost everybody else were rectifiers first, but sourcing it first. Everybody.
Okay. So somebody asks me, Gina asks me, where did I get those little bottles of Jefferson? So let's see here. I could tell you when you go buy it, then I won't be able to go buy the rest of them. But no, I'm not that cool. I found them at Lax Liquors in Washington, D.C. So if you want to take the trip up there, he's got a few left. So that's the spot. Okay, and one question left and one more comment. So this is from Robert. So how do you feel about the relatively new aging processes such as Solera aging and aging in 5-gallon barrels?
Well, I've aged in 5-gallon barrels. That doesn't give it the complexity. You can get color real quickly. It just comes out thin. Solero, kind of the same deal. We need to, good in theory, but again, I think that not to bash anybody, but I think that's trying to accelerate the process.
George says, keep up the great work, Trey. And Mark says, I've heard the Japanese have tremendous respect for American whiskeys. How do you approach various international markets?
Well, like I said, we pulled out of international markets that we were kind of seeding earlier. Excuse me. A lot of international markets have great respect and enjoy bourbons, but it's very small populace that does. And understand why it's such a great product.
that is it for the questions. I'll make one comment and I'll let Melissa wrap it up. Trey, thank you so much for everything you do for us in our markets. We appreciate it so much. I've been in the DC. We're selling Pernod brands exclusively in DC, Maryland, Montgomery County for 11 years now, and I've never dealt with an entity, an actual producer like yourself, who's been so interactive in our market, and we cannot thank you enough for that. So, I speak for especially all my coworkers, everybody I work with. Thank you. So, and we are so excited for the future.
I've done a number of events in Montgomery County. For some reason, I keep getting roped into tasting at the Marriott in Bethesda. But I'll continue to do those. It's one of those, I've got family and a lot of friends up there, so don't throw me in that briar patch type of deal. So I'll keep doing it. I appreciate all your old support, and I'm looking forward to hopefully getting out and doing some of these things live here before too long. So
that's right.
Thank you all. I'm going to run. I'm late for our first customer dinner, so
Thank you, Trey. We are toasting you virtually, and to everyone that joined us tonight, thank you, and we hope to see you at another virtual seminar soon. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers, thanks.
Thank you.